G'day YouTube, Wobbles on a lot here. No doubt you've heard that there's a bunch of people who have a hypothesis that the earth is flat. Truly, they do exist. Most of them, well, they can trace their ideology back through Terry Pratchett, the man who died of vascular dementia after writing the Discworld series of novels. Whereas others, they claim to be descended from pre-Columbus times, back when they say that their ancestors believed that the world was flat. They have absolute terrible trouble in underconstumbling the fact that although the cartographers can map the surface of the earth to appear as if it were flat, they all disagree deeply in the best way to achieve the printed likeness of that. And there genuinely are individuals who believe themselves to be living on a disc, a flat disc with the North Pole at the centre of the disc, and they honestly, genuinely, fair dinkum believe that Antarctica exists not as a continent on the opposite side of globe Earth, which they hate to think about. They believe that Antarctica exists out around there on the boundaries as an ice wall surrounding the disc world that Terry Pratchett told their parents and grandparents back in the 1970s and 80s that they lived upon. But it turns out there's a significant problem with their hypothesis. That problem is the concept of clockwise. In order to be travelling clockwise, the pointer has to be turning in a circle, rotating from the top to the right, to the bottom, to the left, to the top. That's what clockwise is. Because in the Northern Hemisphere, clockwise describes the direction of travel of the shadow upon a sundial. Now here, as it happens, this particular circular table has been set up to be perfectly flat with a spirit level. It's also aligned with true north. So the meridian from the North Pole to the South Pole of, quote, ball Earth runs prezactically through the centre of this flat, round, thin disc, so beloved of Terry Pratchett's following cohort, the flat earthers, the flurfers, the flat tards as they are called. Now here's the funny thing. According to the flat earthers, who generally tend to believe that European civilization represents the world's best practice, they who were descended from the time the Broadacre Agro cult of harvest everythingism began at Göbekli Tepe and spread across the world and eroded the topsoil after overclearing the forest and overgrazing the grasslands that remained. These individuals, because most of the flurfers live above the equator, They never question the idea that sundials in the Northern Hemisphere, when viewed from the Northern Hemisphere, the shadow on a sundial follows the same direction as does the hands on a wristwatch or a clock or a chronograph dial. Whereas, when viewed from the Southern Hemisphere, clockwise is the opposite of dial-wise. It turns out that when we actually take a sundial and have a look at the shadow, what we find is the shadow's time dial indication doesn't actually run clockwise, does it? 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock. The shadow on the sundial actually runs anti-clockwise. Isn't that a fascinating thing? That is, assuming one is looking at an horizontal dial, duly set up, allowing for local magnetic variation. And what do we have here? We have 2 o'clock zone mean time. Right at the moment, at the very end of August, we've got almost zero deviation accruing from the equation of time. June, July, August. Yeah. And we're showing probably seven minutes to 2 on there. We're showing 5 minutes to 2 on the western vertical dial. We're showing 5 minutes to 2 on the north vertical dial. And the north vertical dial, it's the only one that actually runs clockwise in the southern hemisphere. And that's a funny thing. It's beyond the ability of a flat earther to explain. So here's my question for the flat earth fantasists. If I'm living down here 30 degrees south of the equator, then why is it that my lithium titanium solar powered battery in my electric sundial causes the pointers to rotate clockwise, and yet my sundial has its pointer shadow rotating anti-clockwise? Why is that so? Even when I have my sundial mounted on an absolutely level disc lined up with the meridian, pointing to the equator, why is it so, flat earthers? How come this 4-inch by 4-inch by 4-inch 1/27th of a cubic foot of time can, in fact, when set up correctly, tell the time down here in the southern hemisphere? If the flat earthers were correct, then simple horizontal sundials would not function. Vertical sundials would not function. The equation of time, due to the obliquity of the ecliptic, would not be a thing. And mind you, This is a pretty nice example of a 17th century sundial. However, it's been made at the very end of the 20th century to tell the time anywhere in the southern hemisphere between the equator and the South Pole. All you have to do is align the pointer on the quadrant to position the cube so as it'll tell you the time. And the reason why this is saying that it's currently 2:30, whereas the wristwatch chronograph says that it's 19 minutes past 2, that would be because we are observing from considerably to the east of Moree, which is where the centre of the time zone is actually located. From Byron Bay out to Broken Hill, all of New South Wales runs on Moree time, Zone Central time. And the distance between Glen Innes and Moree on the equinox is approximately 11 minutes. So there you see the north vertical dial showing just past 2:30, the horizontal dial showing just past 2:30. The clock showing 2:24, and the west vertical dial showing 2:37. So on average, the 17th century cubic sundial is pretty bloody good, all things considered, local geography included. So there you go, and now you know why your average hillbilly using 300 or 400-year-old technology is absolutely perfectly able to shit all over the heads of every flat earther who ever walked the earth and opened their mouth to squawk regarding their absolutely bullshit hypothesis regarding the earth being but a circular disc floating in space, balanced on the backs of 4 giant elephants standing at the corners of the shell of an immense intergalactic sea turtle swimming through space. Although that is what Pratchett, writer of Discworld, did in fact make his fortune by talking about. Clockwise only works in the northern hemisphere, and sundials shit all over flat earth theory and flat earthers from a great height. And these are facts well known to even the simplest of hillbillies. Wobbles on a lot to YouTube. You take that easy. Ciao.